Kia ora and welcome to the Marlborough Book Festival podcast, the place where you can hear writers talk about their work, their lives and the inspiration behind their writing. I'm Sonia from the committee, and today I'm delighted to be introducing the wonderful Nicolas Dillon speaking to Mike White. Nicolas discusses his very personal and heartfelt tribute to the birds of New Zealand, Drawn to the Wild. This session will look back over the artist's life in Marlborough, the birds he has painted, and his attraction to the more intangible aspects of nature. Please enjoy Nicolas Dillon speaking to Mike White.
Fantastic festival. I hope some of you have been able to go to other sessions and have enjoyed them. But we've got a fabulous session to finish up with Nicolas Dillon today. My name's Mike White. I'm a writer with Stuff. There's going to be the normal time for questions at the end of the session. Just think up things as we're kind of having this discussion that you might want to ask Nicolas later on. And Nick's going to be available outside signing copies that you can buy of this amazing book that he put out late last year, Drawn to the Wild. So can I thank once again, the organisers of this festival, a bunch of volunteers who just do an incredible job in putting on this event. It's a remarkable thing every year that happens, barring COVID. And thank you, the audience, for supporting it so well. And thanks to all the sponsors, but particularly to Dog Point, whose wine I hope some of you are enjoying this afternoon while you listen to Nick. Nick Dillon's a rare thing in New Zealand. He's a full-time artist. Even rarer, he's a full-time artist who specialises in painting wildlife and, in particular, birds. Nick grew up in Marlborough, up the Waihopa Valley, and now, after a bit of time overseas, he lives near the Wairau River on Rapara Road with his wife Charlotte and children Sophia and Archie. His first book, Drawn to the Wild, was released last year. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Nicolas to the stage. So, Nick, tell us where this all began and a story as a 4-year-old with a thud on the window.
I mean, as time's gone on, I've looked back, as we do, and the thing that I remember, what drew me to birds and pursuing this idea of having to make images of them, and the very earliest memory that I have is of the little cottage that we were living in when I was 4 or 5 years old. And as Mike said, there was a thud on the window, and I was perplexed by where this noise had come from. So I rushed outside and rushed to the window and looked out, and I saw the only thing I could see that looked different in the garden bed below at that age was what looked like a sort of stripy sock. And so I rushed out and picked it up, and it was a bird. It was a shining cuckoo, and I was utterly mesmerised by this bird, which was injured, dying in my hands. And I think the thing that I'd seen birds before, of course, but this bird I was holding on to, and it shimmered and with this iridescent plumage, and something very deep inside fired up back then, and it's exactly the same feeling that I have when I get excited about making a painting or having an idea for a painting or seeing something now. And it came from deep down inside. It was very visceral, the feeling, and it sort of welled up, and I liken it to being like an air bubble trapped in ice, this feeling. And I talked to a physician once about where do feelings come from, what organ or what part of the body, and he said, Nick, I think it comes from somewhere, perhaps the solar plexus. So I think this was radiating out from there, and so that was the very, very earliest memory that I have, and the other memories from that time that are very strong all come from nature, and birds. I talk about the goldfinch, the red admiral butterfly, certain things that trigger and sort of sense that came from nature. The smell of daphne seems to be really strong, and jasmine, and all these things that just resonate and take me back to that time. But the shining cuckoo was the thing that I think really did it. It just was this glittering bird that had arrived. I didn't know it had arrived from the Pacific on migration, but looking back on it now, it had brought the sort of glittering, shimmering light of the Pacific with it.
Did it die?
It did, and sadly. But the news is, Mike, that it was taken to Nelson by my father, and there was an elderly taxidermist there, George Elliott, and he stuffed it, mounted it, and it came back home.
And do you still have it?
I don't, but it belongs to someone I know. So yeah.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah. I got rid of all my stuffed creatures. I went through a phase of needing them out of the house.
So describe the environment that you're growing up on the farm. I think the farm had been in your family since about 1848, isn't it?
Yes.
That you were growing up on, and your parents were farming then up the Waihope. Just describe the environment and what you're seeing when you look out from your house and the creatures that are in it.
Yeah. Well, it was dry hill country. We had the cottage we initially grew up was low down on the farm. And then when I was 5 or 6 years old, we moved further up the hill where my parents built a house. And that house site was chosen for its view down the valley. And it was one of those views that you're pretty lucky, anybody's pretty lucky to grow up with. It was a very open, expansive view towards the Richmond Ranges and the hills of the Marlborough Sounds, and that expansive view really captivated me. It just shimmered with light, and when we got an easterly and it brought wind in, it brought air in off Cook Strait, and that mingled with the dry air of the Waihope Valley. It seemed to diffuse the light, and that even way back then, that light just played in my imagination, and it's something that I still use. I mean, just on Friday, I was painting a banded dotterel, and I was trying to surround it. This banded dotterel is quite a large oil that I'm working on, and I was trying to surround it with an atmosphere and light, and I always refer back to that sort of vibrating, diaphanous sort of hazy light. It spoke to me then, and it fascinates me still. So that was the view over sort of foothills down the length of the Waihope Valley, and then behind us was a relatively steep sort of mountain, hill range of hills, which was part of the farm, and that was my playground. I was relatively introverted, I think, and nature for a young child is a very easy place to escape to. You only have to deal with yourself and the creatures around, and I guess I went to nature a lot right from the beginning, and wandered the hills, and felt like I became a part of it. So. Yeah, that was the home environment. Yep. It was a hill country sheep and beef farm.
Yeah, and throughout this period, while you're kind of immersed in this wonderful environment that you're lucky enough to grow up in, you start drawing, don't you, from a reasonably early age? Yeah,
I did, Mike, and the first drawings I made. Well, I'm sure I was drawing before 6, but I think that the first drawings that my parents kept were this one here, 1972. They
aged what?
Aged.
Sorry,
6.
we're gonna make it your age now evident to everyone, but you have to tell us how old you are now.
Yeah, round about, should we say 5 or 6? Yep. So that's a red-tailed tropic bird. I'd never seen a red-tailed tropic bird. That came from a book, a photograph. And I had this desire to make images of birds.
And we talked about banded dotterel earlier on. Here's one of your first efforts at it.
Yes.
And shall we look at a later effort? So there's a bit of progress there, Nick, isn't there? Yeah, good. Yeah, well done.
So interestingly, that second shot I've used that very pose, which was drawn while I was sitting in the Wairau River a couple of years back. And that very pose is the painting I'm talking about that I'm working on now. So I've used that for that painting. But if we go back to where we were, this painting, which was made in 1972, this drawing, I think 1972 as well. And I've put it alongside here, a plate of the banded dotterel and the New Zealand dotterel from Buller's birds. Yeah. So that, seeing those drawings, those books rather.
Tell us about that. Buller's Birds, a lot of people will probably know better than me, but it's this kind of iconic book of New Zealand bird life, isn't it? Yeah. And your grandparents had a copy. It's like an 1880s copy of this. And as a kid, they would bring it down and you were allowed to leaf through it, weren't you? It was a pretty special kind of experience for a young kid, I imagine.
Well, it was phenomenal. It was the biggest book I'd ever seen. I mean, it was huge and it weighed a ton. Well, there were 2 volumes of it, and it was bound in calf. Well, they were bound in calfskin, and they had sort of gilt gold edges to the pages, and every plate, every image was shielded with a piece of tissue paper. So, pulling back that, I write about it in the book. That experience of taking off that, removing that leaf of tissue paper and looking at the image was for me was just terribly exciting. Where's
that copy of Buller's?
It's in my studio.
So you've still got it?
Yeah. Wow. So it's 1888, I think, as you said, and back then it was the second edition, and people had to subscribe to copies, and their names are in the front. So it's a incredible thing to have.
Occasionally you would draw other things. Only occasionally, though?
I think I'd probably drew all sorts of things, Mike, but birds were certainly the evident output.
You loved hares, though, didn't you?
Yeah, and that was something. I mean, on the farm, of course, we were out on the farm all the time, and my brother and sister and I would always ride on the back of the four-wheel drive, and we'd go over the back of this front country, this steep hill country, and what we turned out the back. And my eyes, of course, were always on the outlook for things in nature, and birds were there, and I was, sort of capturing these images in my mind's eye and taking them back with me inside to draw when I got home. But the other thing that really captivated me were hares, and these things would just spring out of nowhere, just materialise out of the tussock. And I got really fascinated by them. And then it became a little challenge to myself at that age to see if I could spot them just lying on the hillside or sitting on the hillside. And I just loved the way they became part of the landscape. And it built up a very... I built a very good eye, I guess, for looking, for sort of honing my skills for looking. I look back on that time as it being quite formative.
It's a brilliant training ground, isn't it? But while you're immersed in this environment of the farm and the hill country Marlborough, then you were exposed to another environment completely, because you say that your father wasn't exactly a passionate farmer, and he actually loved the water and the sounds. And so all of a sudden, when you were able to go down the sounds and had a boat, you were exposed to a whole lot of other birds that suddenly you were able to start drawing.
Yeah. No, my father was, he was frustrated by farming a lot of the time, and in the heat of summer it all got too much, and the flies and the sheep and the tranquil waters of the Marlborough Sounds called him, and so we'd fly down the valley at something like 140 k's and down Rapara Road, which was all, there were no grapes back then, it was just bare stony bony sheep country and sheep shot from the fence lines and shades of tree shade, and we arrived in the Sounds, and everything just suddenly became very peaceful. And anyway, we sailed, and so seabirds became a part of my sort of bird experience.
Every time you go down there, counting yourself lucky that you made it down Rapara Road at 140 k's without an accident, you would draw birds while you're out there on the water?
Yeah, I was always drawing, Mike, and so it was just a natural thing to do. But so this was a yacht that my parents had, and I spent a lot of time on the near the bow. It was something beautiful about while we were sailing, sitting on the bow and just looking at waves and wind and waves breaking, and the way that wind would sort of build waves and etch the surface of the sea. And I fell in love with the sea as well. You know, it was a beautiful thing.
So this innate talent and this extreme energy and enthusiasm that you have for art and for drawing and for birds, how much is this encouraged, fostered at school while you're there?
I don't think art was a big thing at school. I mean, the prep school that I went to in South Canterbury, Waihi, I mean, we drew and I did sets for the plays and that sort of thing, you know, backgrounds. And then I went to Christ College after that, and art was certainly not considered an important
Was
subject.
it available? Could you do it?
Oh, it was available, and I did do it, and I wasn't going to miss that. But we had an old art teacher who had been to the war and taught my father, I think, and he just told war stories, and that was our education, was the war, not art. And so we all got doodling and drawing Spitfires and things like that. And he'd, you know, as I say in the book, he'd suddenly bellow out, if I see one more side-on profile of a Spitfire, I'll cane you. And that was art until my last year, and then we got a proper art teacher.
So until that time, you're essentially self-taught in drawing and in painting.
Yeah, it's just something, I think, like all children, something that I did and loved and.
Okay, and so you're down in Christchurch, and when you're about 14 or 15, you're in a bookshop and you discover a book by a guy called Raymond Ching, who you'd never heard of before. Tell me about that experience and about how and what you did that afternoon after you found that book.
Yeah. Well, I was just in a bookshop, as I often was, in my lunch breaks and after school, and I love books and art books and books on natural history. And I just stumbled upon this. It was a big book called The Bird Paintings by this guy called Raymond Ching. And as you say, I hadn't heard of him, and I was just absolutely gobsmacked by his work. It was like I'd seen a lot of bird art or bird illustration, and his work just had a vitality and a lifelike quality that I'd not seen anything like it, and I don't think the world had seen paintings of that lifelike sort of quality.
And he was a New Zealander.
And he was a Kiwi. Yeah, he was a New Zealander.
Where did he live in New Zealand?
Well, he was, funny enough, he was brought up in Nelson. Nelson originally, and then Wellington, and then he moved to the UK, where he's come back and forth, but now lives there. So that was a pretty exciting moment, and I was just shaking with excitement, and was in the bookshop for a prolonged amount of time, and the kindly woman behind the book behind the counter suggested maybe I should head off to the library, where you could go and spend time looking at books. Yeah. And so I went to the library, biked straight to the librarbary.
Skipped school that afternoon, didn't you?
Flagged school. Yeah. That was not. I'd forgotten about school, to be frank, and found several other copies of other books that he'd produced.
By that stage, was Raymond Ching world class? He was being recognised around the world.
Yeah, he'd illustrated a book, the Collins, a field guide essentially in England, the Collins Guide to the Birds of Britain, I think it was called, and that had to much acclaim. And then he'd produced more serious paintings that weren't just illustrative, and he was being heralded as the big news. Yeah.
So when you eventually did return to school after the library session, you tell us about what your school careers guidance counsellor said when you suggested you wanted to be an artist.
Yeah, well, we had these meetings with the careers advisor, and I suggested I was interested in art, vaguely, strangely interested in, for a bloke at a school like that, interested in fashion design, and winemaking was the other thing. But I said to him that that art was, that painting was really the career that I wanted to pursue, and he just looked at me and he said, well, seriously, Nick, this school, we're trying to produce lawyers and doctors and so on and so forth. And I said, I was kind of thinking, come on. And he said, how are you going to be able to afford to drive a BMW? He thought that might flatten me. But I was just like, I gave up at that point and headed out the door.
You don't happen to drive a BMW now, do you? No, it'd be nice if you could drive past this place. Told you. But your father gave you some great advice too, didn't he? Because you could have become a farmer. You could have returned up to the Waihopai Valley and carried on with a farm. But your father told you something. He said, do something you love. Great advice? Great advice,
I think, really. I mean, too often we're driven down paths by the powers that be, or parents perhaps even, that have aspirations for where a child might go, and that often, as we know, doesn't work out. But my father, I think, had understood himself that he'd gone back to the farm, and that probably, as time went on, he realised he should have done something else. So that was his advice, and good advice too, I think.
Okay, so as school, still about 15, you write to Raymond Ching, don't you, in the UK, and you ask him for his advice about what you do with your career.
Yeah, I just thought I've got to get it from the horse's mouth. So I'd worked out through looking at his books what street he perhaps lived on in this little village in Sussex, and I just took a plunge and wrote a letter, wrote the address down, sent it off, expecting probably nothing to come back, and finally a letter did come back. He said in the opening lines that your letter has emerged from under a pile of paper in the studio, which I can well imagine now. And that was about 6 months later, and I got this great letter back from him. I'd asked him a whole host of questions, but most importantly, what were his feelings on going to art school or not, and whether I should. And I'd sent some photos of my work, and he could see that what I wanted to do was paint birds in a kind of a realistic fashion, and that art school was going to send me or push me in all other directions, and that wouldn't be the right fit.
So his advice was to travel the world, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of going to art school.
He said, get alongside the artists you admire, travel the world and look at as much art as you can. So.
But before you did that, at aged 18, you held your first exhibition. I mean, that's pretty uncommon or extraordinary, Nick. And could that have gone either way? If it had been a complete flop, would you have, turned around, gone to the farm, or found a career that you could have afforded a BMW with? I mean, tell us about that, because 18-year-olds don't necessarily always have, aspiring artists don't have exhibitions.
No, I was bloody lucky, Mike, to get that. It was partly thanks to my grandfather, who was a great buyer of art and bought from this gallery, and he took some of my work along. And John Simpson, who lives here in Marlborough now, may well be out in the audience, I'm not sure, very kindly said he'd hold an exhibition. So that was extraordinary, and it was in the days when galleries, were packed full with punters, and so I arrived a little late to the opening, and they were spilling out the door drinking wine, and all the paintings bar one had sold.
So it was 15 out of 16 sold, didn't they?
Right. Yeah, and so that was incredible. But if it had been the other way round, I think, to answer your question, I think I was probably too bloody minded to give up.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, but really, when you sell 15 out of 16 at your first exhibition as an 18-year-old, there's no turning back, is there?
No, and it felt right.
Yeah.
It endorsed my desire and feeling to pursue a career.
And so part of that, you followed Raymond Ching's advice, and you did travel. You went to the UK, to England, didn't you?
Yeah.
And when you got there, you got in touch with Raymond Ching again and wanted to go and see him. And tell us about his initial response and what happened after that.
Yeah, well, the first thing I did in London was, funny enough, I'd had an introduction to a gallery, the Tryon and Moreland Gallery, or the Tryon Gallery as it was then. It was a Cork Street gallery, which was the gallery to exhibit in, and they'd kindly taken on some paintings of mine, and I knew that Ray Chinga was selling his work there, so I cheekily asked for his telephone number, which wasn't given away to most people, and they, being a Kiwi, they gave it to me. So I rang him up, and he said, right, he said, come and see me on Wednesday at 9 a.m. and don't muck me round, another word he used, but... and he said, I can see you for half an hour. So I thought, right, okay. So I went down there with a handful of paintings and emerged 8 hours later with a bag load of books on art and all sorts of stuff, actually, but art and birds and things. And I'd spent 8 hours with my hero, and that was an extraordinary thing, and we spent the day just looking at his work, talking about art, talking about music, talking about all sorts of stuff, and just getting to know him, and I think he could see that my passion was akin to his, although I have to say that he's the most intensely passionate man about his work that I've ever met in my life. I mean, this guy was... You know, he had drawer loads of hummingbird skins and things. It was like a museum, and he would, you know, he would hold them like this and shake, and his voice sort of stuttered with excitement. And for me, it was bliss.
Yeah,
it was bliss.
And so you stayed over in the UK. You travelled to the north of England. You spent your 21st. Tell us how you spent your 21st birthday, mate.
Well, I'd got having grown up on a farm and up a dusty road here, and having lived in the south of England for 6 months or so, it had all got too much and too claustrophobic. So I drove north in one hit. I thought I was going to stop, do the drive over many days, and I got as far as the wonderful Bamburgh Castle on the coast in northern England, and I just pulled up in the sand dunes there and thought I was just asleep in the back of my vehicle, as you do at that age, and it was just amazing. I stepped out and it was dusk, and this beautiful soft northern dusk, and there was Bamburgh. I mean, I'd barely seen a castle in my life, and here was this extraordinary castle with rooks and ravens and crows wielding around its towers, and right beside me where I'd parked my car, this short-eared owl was sitting looking at me like the wildest creature I'd ever seen, and I just felt at home. And the next day, I went and stayed with some people who I'd been given the names of in the moors inland, and they had a grouse moor, a sort of hunting estate, and they had this beautiful stone house in the middle of the moors, deep in the moors, and I was taken out on the moor and left to my own devices to draw and paint, and I lost myself painting red grouse and all these other birds, and it was just a beautiful sort of smoky, hazy afternoon, and next minute this peregrine falcon, which is a bird I'd never seen, and it was like the holy grail of falcons, I guess, and it just pitched in next to me. All the birds had suddenly fallen silent, and I knew something was up. And it pitched in on this rock a couple of metres away and just was there. And after the short-haired owl experience, it was like, and it was my 21st birthday, and I just felt it was just one of those serendipitous moments where I felt that that life was meant to be.
And then you got the opportunity to have an exhibition over there, and you spent, while you're preparing for that, you spent about a year, was it, in North Norfolk, and preparing paintings for this exhibition, and you began painting oils at this point. And one of the paintings that you did at this time, I think this one, is it? The Eurasian Avocets.
The Avocets, yeah.
Now, you say that this remains one of my better works. Explain why you like this, why you think it's one of your better works, even though it's from a long time ago now.
I love the composition, the light. It just all came together. It's the second oil painting I've ever made at that time. And it just worked. It was one of those things that sometimes paintings come off really well, and I still look at it. That's, funnily enough, owned by a friend of mine in Christchurch who happened to be in the UK. His father had just sold a phenomenally expensive old Alfa Romeo P3 at Christie's at Monte Carlo. Rob had a bit of money up his sleeve at the time because he had a dole out from this, and he came to my exhibition. It was quite a hefty price, and
even then
English pounds then. And he just said, "I'm having that," and I said, "Fantastic." So
you get to see it every now and again.
Yeah,
isn't that nice?
Which is lovely. It's even been here at the Millennium Gallery on exhibition. So,
You eventually did come back to New Zealand in your mid-20s, and when you arrived back after this amazing experience that you've had in the UK, and you've travelled around Europe also looking at an awful lot of art and talking to people, but when you arrived back here, did people kind of think, oh, well, Nick will have got that out of his system, this bird business, and did they think that you'd kind of now get a real job that could afford a BMW?
I don't know. I think it had become clear that I was going to paint, and certainly birds. But I have regularly been asked this question of, and by close friends too. Are you still painting birds? As though that's just something you do to start with, and then you grow up and get a real career as an artist, painting something else.
But you returned home to Marlborough too, didn't you? I mean, in a way, it's a nice parallel with some of the birds that you paint, the migratory birds. They return home to where they are. Tell us about, this is the bar-tailed godwit, isn't it? So tell us a little bit about this amazing bird that, and just very briefly, what its annual cycle is essentially.
Yeah, godwits have become pretty well known, so a lot of people know the story now, but they're an extraordinary bird that breeds in Arctic, across the top of the Arctic, really, the Arctic tundra in Siberia. There are various different subspecies of the bar-tailed godwit, and we get one that breeds in Arctic Alaska. And they go up there for a very brief time when they fly north. So they breed there and then they fly south to New Zealand. They go north through the Yellow Sea up through China. And this is all, they've got satellite monitors now, and we can see it all in real time as they do it, and it's extraordinary. And but the most remarkable thing is that they fly direct on their southbound journey across the vast belly of the Pacific, non-stop, 8, 9, 10 days against all storms and headwinds, and arrive here into northern New Zealand, and it's a phenomenal thing, and I've been lucky enough a couple of years ago to see 18 juvenile bar-tailed godwits land in front of me on a beach. Wow. And these are juveniles.
They've just finished their migration.
They've just finished.
Wow.
Flying across the Pacific. Juvenile birds, never been here before, 3 or 4 months old. It's staggering, and you can tell that they've just arrived because their wings, they can't put their wings, they've been doing this. They can't put their wings away, and they stagger around and they feed, and this was on the Mangawhai sandspit in Northland, and it was just an extraordinary morning, and these things came out of a leaden sky and pitched in next to me, and I just set up my scope and looked into their eyes, which just had this gleam like the ripened berries of the tundra that they'd left far behind, and just looking into that spirit was incredible. And I'm fascinated by them. I always have been, but to see that just really...
Because we ring the bells in Christchurch, don't they, every year, But less heralded, but equally amazing. Bells don't get rung for these little fellows. These are the redneck stint. It's about the only time it's laudable to be rednecked anywhere in the world now. But tell us about these amazing little things as well.
Yeah, well, they're they're tiny. They're this long, and they're about, I can't remember their weight. But
30 grams,
30
I
grams
think you said.
is something like that. And so they do the same thing, although I don't think they possibly go down through Asia. It hasn't been proved yet, down through Asia rather than straight across the Pacific. But they turn up here. These were drawn possibly at Lake Ellesmere, but maybe out at Lake Grasmere. And I love them. That just because it is more staggering than the godwit. That a bird that small that could be blown straight back to Siberia, and these guys breed in Siberia and eastern Russia, somewhere north of Chukotka, and it's just phenomenal.
It is.
Yeah.
You say in some ways you've been swimming against the tide, and I know Graham Sidney, who the great landscape artist from Central Otago, who I know you've got to know well and is a friend of yours. Graham Sidney's often said that he's faced criticism for being a realist, and his paintings of the landscape are too literal. Have you ever attracted any comment or criticism about that you're just a realist?
No, but I can smell it on the breeze out there, Mike. I think in art, art's such a broad delta these days, and realist art is probably considered like it's been seen before. It's been made for centuries, but really, I think, like Graham, to hell with it. We do what we love.
Yeah.
We need to put these things on canvas, and that's, although I'm probably after something that's a feeling that's more abstract than realist, I guess, in a sense, if that makes any sort of sense.
And I mean,
but realism is how I come to it.
And I mean, you say, I paint birds to be honest and true to myself, and I continue to find it deeply rewarding practices. So it doesn't matter what anyone else might say or might think. It's you being true to yourself.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And I think that is so important in everything we do as people, and we must believe in ourselves. And I think a lot of people go into art and because they want to be an artist, and they chase trends, and trends have always been part of art. But I think at the end of the day, if you paint what you love, what you truly believe, what is deep down inside, what is you. That's the most important thing. And
who buys your paintings, Nick? Are they New Zealanders? Are they expats who are homesick? Who are your clients nowadays?
It's a mix, really, Mike. And yes, paintings go overseas. People who want to be reminded of our birds who live away from them, and those birds and nature mean something to them. People who have a connection with nature, but also people who love art, I think. Yeah. So it is a mix.
Do you think you're still improving or changing at all?
Well, I think gradually, yeah. And I hope that I'm improving, and that's certainly the desire. There's just so far. I feel there is so far to go, and it just a bit over 50. One starts to see the horizon out there, and I go, shit. There's a lot of work to be done, because I feel I'm a long way from what I could be. Yeah. To be honest, and I don't. It might be hard to understand when people are impressed by the paintings, but I actually don't feel like I'm a great painter, and I think there's a long way to go. I think it was. Thomas Mann, the German writer and poet, who wrote something like, a writer is someone for whom, how does it go? A writer is someone for whom writing is harder than it is for other people. And there's a resonance with me there that I fight bloody hard to make a painting. Yeah. And there might be some talent there, but it's sheer will and bloody-mindedness to make a painting and get it out the way that I do. And so, yeah, there's a long way to go in that sense to get better, I think.
What have we got here, Nick? This is South Island pied oystercatchers. Tell us about a little story about these birds, about the time on State Highway 1 where you came across.
Well, that's out of the book, Mike, and I mean, pied oystercatchers are a bird that I love, and I was driving south of Cheviot one day and found there was a freshly killed one, had been hit by a car. Sadly, they sometimes fly low across the road, and it was in the middle of the road, but right with it was its mate, who was distraught, obviously, if birds can be
because they mate for life?
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Well, they certainly pair up for some years. And so I pulled over because I could see for two reasons that there was going to be a second bird killed. And also I was quite interested in having a good look at this bird because you don't often get a chance to. So I pulled it off the road and its mate just sort of came along as I was and stood there while I took some photos and I think I did a drawing but yeah, it was pining for its soulmate.
Yeah. What birds are there? Certain birds that captivate you more than others that you find yourself returning to time and again, Nick?
There are, and I think often it's birds that involve water, and it's birds that I perhaps grew up with on the farm, the paradise duck, the New Zealand falcon, the spoonbills you've popped up there, and they've become a very important source of inspiration for me, and I just find them extraordinary birds in all senses. They seem very ancient sort of creatures, as though they've, as I think I've said or written before somewhere, like they belong to some very ancient tribe, and they fascinate me. And I think as much as the birds, it's because they are white and they absorb and reflect light. Yeah. And as that painting probably illustrates as much as any painting I've done of them, it's about something beyond something else that's going on. All this I've talked about that vibrating light and things earlier, and it's trying to embody that, this light, this. What are we all doing on this spinning ball? It's light that brings life. Without it, nothing would be visible. And I think in my paintings, although as I said, I'm a realist, and I'm trying to get beyond the bird or sense something beyond the bird, the invisible. And a Swedish poet and artist wrote something that's really resonated with me always, and that is that to see the invisible, we must thoroughly observe the visible. Thoroughly observe it. And I think it's that thing where something so well, when I look, you can go beyond. It might sound a bit magical, but there is so much out there that we don't understand in this world. And I think through painting, I feel, I can't see it, but I sense it, and trying to get that sense of it, that thing that we don't know about this
intangible
world. Yeah, the intangible, ineffable aspects of this world.
Mind you, the time. Oh, and that's just another example. That's the detail of the spoonbill's bill, isn't it?
Yeah, that's like I likened it to a tribal artifact. It's just ornate. It's extraordinary. Yeah. They remind me of a Masai Mara warrior or something, and especially out here in the Wairau Lagoons where they've got what I call scientific bling. They've got rings which are often bright yellow and red, and they look like these sort of Masai warriors.
Yeah. The amount of time that you've spent out just looking at birds, painting and drawing birds, you've inevitably become a bit of an expert in their behaviour. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, yeah.
So, can you answer, why do birds stand on one leg?
Well, often it's to rest and to conserve heat. So they lose a lot of heat through their legs. And it's rest, and they find it remarkably easy to stand on one leg, Mike.
Good luck to them.
Unlike us.
Yeah, another point where they're much smarter or better than us. One of the just tell us this wonderful story. This is an Australasian bittern, and you've got to know these birds. You've got to know their nature and their habit. but sometimes out of the blue, things happen, you come across them and you get to observe it firsthand. Just tell us the wee story about this bird and what you saw one day driving back from Karamea, I think it was.
Yeah, it was Karamea. And it was just inland from Karamea towards the Oparara caves and gorge. But the bittern is seldom seen. They're a marsh bird, they're uncommon, they're threatened, and they look just like the rushes. And when they are disturbed, they stand upright, unlike this guy, and look like a bulrush or what have you. So they almost become invisible. But here I was bowling down a shingle road and came round the corner, and here was this bittern in a little wee ditch, and it had just snaffled an eel. And I came to a screeching halt, of course, and the bittern was just there, and they freeze rather than fly often. Yep. And he froze, he swallowed the eel, and he froze in this and tucked himself in because he had no rushes to imitate. And this eel went round and round in his neck. And I subjected him to some pain, I suspect, because I didn't have my drawing gear. That was in my boot, sadly. I learnt a lesson that day. But I did have a road map and a pen. So I sketched him out the window and then went on my merry way and let him have his dinner. But that was
all the while the eel's wriggling inside him or trying to get down. Oh, gosh. Tell us, that's a wonderful example of you being at the ready, seeing something and being able to sketch it. Tell us a bit more about your work, about how you sketch. And do you want to show, just briefly, bring out one of your sketchbooks so that people have a better idea of that and the process that you go through as you capture birds in the wild?
Yeah, I don't spend enough time outdoors painting. I need to more, but it is my spiritual home, I guess. In that sense, it's my turanga waiwai. It's where I feel closest to myself, to my inner self, and working outdoors is that connection point. I can't work from photograph. I mean, I do take photographs and use them as well, but for me, the absolutely vital thing is to observe firsthand, as if you are seeing something for the very first moment. So the human brain remembers things and imprints that on our system, and to be able to try and see things afresh without it being coloured by previous experiences. I try to leave myself very open in that sense. The wonderful neurologist Oliver Sacks said that the visual image stays on the retina for about 7 or 8 seconds before the mind colours it with other experiences. So for me, it's getting that moment down in the sketchbook. So I work through a high-powered telescope and binoculars and try and draw in the moment to see as freshly as I can. So I work into a sketchbook like this. I actually make these sketchbooks myself because the paper that I use I have imported, and it just chops down into a size that makes a sketchbook. And so I learned how to bind books, and it's a craft that I kind of enjoy. But here is some sketches of a weka done on the west coast. It's an example. This one I actually drew, and I actually painted this the following day back in my studio because I didn't have a lot of time at that moment. But many of these paintings, that was on the Mangawhai spit around the time I saw the dotterels that I was referring to, and that was painted on the spot. But I make lots of drawings, and then if I do have the chance to get out, if the birds are hanging around long enough, that's a banded rail on Waiheke Island. If the birds are hanging around long enough, then and the conditions are right, I'll use watercolour as well.
Sure. The Wairau river, the valley, the lagoons, I imagine they're familiar stomping ground for you. How far do you roam, though? You've talked about other places in New Zealand. Do you consciously make trips around New Zealand to capture different birds?
Yeah, sadly, well, not sadly, but because I love it, but most of the stuff is done relatively close to home, just because of the convenience and family life and children and things like that. I mean, I think as time goes on, I might roam further, but I do obviously get away at times, but I think there's something very beautiful about getting to know your own backyard, to come into contact with birds that you know on a regular basis, and an environment and a light and things, and you can never learn enough about it. So that so the Wairau River, Kaikoura Coast, the Upper Wairau, Sanana area, that probably, and the Vernon Lagoons out here.
So this is you where?
Yeah, this is out here on the lagoons. Yep.
And is this, that's a common kind of situation to find you in? Like, is it binoculars? You've probably got a scope there.
Normally I have a scope, and yeah, that's a typical sort of spot, finding something that's vaguely comfortable to sit on.
Yeah, so do you take anything for comfort, like a chair or
I've got
anything?
a little blow up, the blow up mattresses we use for camping.
Oh yeah.
Well, I found one
ones,
in Mitchell Sports here that they had that had been given by the rep, which was a miniature one, and it was just perfect for sticking under your bum. So that's in my backpack, and it blows up.
And how many hours might you be out there for?
It all depends. I mean, I can lose myself sometimes for hours. Yeah.
Do you sometimes go out there or find yourself out there and just think, I'm not going to draw today, I'm just going to sit and absorb and enjoy this? Or is it always work when you're out there?
That's part of work, just the sitting and looking. But yes, I mean, sometimes I do go out and I just sit and look. And for me, it's the beauty of observation and that looking. I mean, so much, falls into the soul by just looking, and drawing creates a three-way thing between the eyes and the brain and the hand, and there's something that sort of cements the image inside in combination with the sketchbook. But even just looking is a very beautiful thing, and I can lose myself for hours, and I feel it's a very primitive feeling, and I feel like an ancient hunter or an Inuit or something sitting on an ice floe and just looking, and I could sit for hours and look, or walk and look. I mean, it's.
Do you always go out on your own, or do you ever have company with you, or you just want to be there by
Most
yourself?
of the time, I'm doing it on my own. Yeah. But I mean, I don't mind people, Mike. So
Good. Yeah.
people can come along if they want.
Are some paintings that you do, Nick, just you love them too much, or they feel too special, or they're too good in some way that you can't bear to give them away or sell them, and that you keep yourself?
Mike, most of the times when I've finished a painting, I can see where all the problems are for me, what I wrangled with, and I guess although they get close to what I'm after, it's that thing where you have an idea of what a painting's going to be, but it's a concept that has no concrete being. It's an idea that floats here somewhere or in here, and it's only when it comes out and emerges on the sheet of paper or the canvas that it becomes a solid and real, a concrete thing. And often that's disappointing because it's not how I imagined it, but imagination's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And so we always want or expect more, and it's probably in hindsight when I've forgotten the issues with the paintings that I look back on them and I think actually that was a bloody good thing. But we've slowly, and my wife Charlotte's encouraged me to keep work along the way, and I've realised the value of that also, to build up a collection of works that either mark certain points in my career or are paintings that have some significance for various reasons.
one drawing that you have kept that you've kept for a very long time is a picture of a bellbird. Do you want to pull that one out of your bag and just show people and explain to us when you painted it, when you drew it, and why it still sits on your wall at home, as I understand?
Well, look, this was when I was 11, so it's nothing special. But Mike thought it'd be nice to bring it along, and it wasn't me that kept it; it was my parents or my grandmother. I think.
Thank goodness for them,
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's just a bellbird feeding, hanging penduline-like, working its way down a flax flower, and was painted at home on the farm. I remember doing it. It's quite a green-looking bellbird, I have to say, but it's just something that I've been, like those early drawings, reminds me that I've not done anything else. That's been it.
Nick, can I ask, in all the years that you've been doing this, which is 30 plus, 40 years, kind of, where you've been doing it seriously, what changes have you seen in the environment as you've been painting birds?
Well, I think there have been a lot, and it's been slow. But I think for me, the obvious thing is, which makes it a very global issue, is the migratory birds, the red-necked stint, the godwits. There's a wonderful little bird that used to show up a lot out at Lake Grasmere. The curlew sandpiper, another favourite of mine, breeds up in Arctic Siberia. Not much bigger than a red-necked stint. Its numbers have dwindled. I haven't seen one out there for years. It's things like the reclamation of tidal estuaries in China, the Yellow Sea, those areas. Things we're doing here, perhaps what's going on in the Arctic, maybe warming. That's where I notice it, is things that are going on with migratory birds mostly. Perhaps even the times that they arrive are varying a little bit, and that they're clocking into what's going on in the environment and trying to attune themselves to what's happening in their northern breeding grounds. So
so it's a constant concern as to how things are changing, generally for the worse.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us like what we're seeing. I mean, Rebecca Priestley spoke about this yesterday in Antarctica, and she was slightly heartening, I think, but the fear is that, it's not going to be as bad perhaps as we think. But I mean, as she said, Antarctica's been warm. What was it? I can't remember the title of her book.
15 million
years, isn't it? Yeah. So it's been warmer. They were growing beech trees down there, but I don't know what that means for us. We might be fried.
No, indeed. Look, we've got a few minutes for questions. Have people got questions while Nick's here? At the back, sir.
I'm just thinking about your question about realism, Mike, and I think you were pointing out how the world of art's always one of fashion and trends. Can you see a time, I suppose this world gets crazier, and the species where realism becomes sort of nearly fashionable, nearly the colour of it?
I think there's always a place for realism, Luke, and I think, strangely enough, painting nature, it mightn't be a bad time to be painting nature as well for that reason. I think, and I don't paint for environmental reasons, but if there's one thing that comes out of my work or out of what I do, is that having that time to sit and observe the world around us. I think as humans we've forgotten to do that, and we're not treating our environment very well, and we only need to look at our native people around the world, old cultures, and the way they respect the land and the environment, and I think we need to look back at them, because what we're doing, we're forgetting about it, and we're not looking. We're too busy making money and doing whatever. I don't know whether that really answers your question, Luke. I diverted there a little bit, deviated rather.
Too busy buying BMWs.
Yeah. Oh, it could be that.
Other questions for Nick while we've got him here? wanted to know, Nick, whether, you remain a full-time artist. How uncommon is that in New Zealand?
I don't mix and mingle enough with the art world, but I think the nature of making money from art, there are a lot who have to supplement it with another job, and so I feel very lucky to be able to do it full time. And I've been very well supported over the years, in the early years, by my parents, and then I've been lucky enough to sell paintings and sell them well, and increasingly so, and without the buying public, without those people who have supported by buying paintings, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I feel exceptionally lucky.
Do you, beyond being lucky, that people like your paintings, do you just feel the luckiest guy in the world that you've been able to have a life doing exactly what you wanted to do, essentially?
Yeah, that's not lost on me, Mike. It's I do, and I have to. As the older I get, the more I'm reminded that by looking at my friends who are battling with all sorts of stuff in their work environments, and here am I sitting on a log in the Wairau Lagoons or in my studio doing pretty much exactly what I want. It's not to say there's not been a lot of hard work and toil and grind, but it's a beautiful thing to be able to do, and to be able to express what I want to say.
Well, thanks for doing it, Nick, and thank you for putting some of your amazing paintings into this wonderful book. As I say, there's copies of the books that will be available afterwards outside, and Nick will be available to sign copies of the book, Drawn to the Wild. We'll close the session now, but please don't go away, because it is the last session of the book festival. So Margie's going to come up and just say a wee karakia for us. But in the meantime, can you please just thank Nick for this wonderful session?
That was Nicolas Dillon speaking to Mike White at the 2021 Marlborough Book Festival. A big thanks to all the writers who have supported the festival, as well as the audiences that attended in person or listened online. If you'd like to learn more about this year's event, head over to marlboroughbookfest.co.nz. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please recommend it to family and friends. Thanks for listening.